You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Petty. Coming up, we're going to talk about one of the toughest jobs out there, caregiving. For millennials, the load is extra complex, juggling kids, a career, and the needs of your loved one. Over the next hour, you'll hear from caregivers and advocates about how they face this challenge. Our guests are Rachael Piltch-Loeb, the author of Millennial Caregiver, Caring for Your Loved Ones in the Busiest Years of Your Life. Rachael, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're also joined by Viviam Sifontes, research educator at Moffit Cancer Center. Viviam, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And Lauren Klinger, Wesley Chapel resident and writer. She's been a caregiver and is the author of the Learn From My Mistakes substack. Lauren, thank you as well.
Thank you.
So, in the introduction to your substack, Lauren, you write about the responsibility of caring for your father and how that kind of caught you by surprise in some ways. Can you share a little bit about what led you to that situation and why you decided to write about it?
Yeah, my dad was always the old dad among all my friends. I was born when he was 42. And so like when I turned 18, he was 60. And we always thought he had heart problems. We always thought he would die before my mom. But surprisingly, my mom died suddenly in 2007, and I'm an only child. So it was all on me as he grew older to care for him. And he just gradually declined. And I sort of kind of closed my ears, closed my eyes to it, and just tried to live my life. I was, getting started in my career, dating, doing all the things you do in your 20s, and sort of trying not to think about the eventual time when my dad would get old and die. And then he started to deteriorate. He had some falls. He got some diagnoses. He had congestive heart failure and kidney disease, and he just stopped taking care of himself. And I realized that I should have been preparing for this all along, and I should have been making plans for what would happen when he couldn't take care of himself. Where would he live? What documents did we need? Did we need a lawyer? What would we do with all of his stuff? How will I go to doctor's appointments? How will we keep track of everything? And so I felt like I made all these mistakes. And then when he died, I was like, these mistakes shouldn't just be purposeless. I should write about them so that other people who are now going through what I went through in my late 20s, early 30s, they can learn from what I did wrong.
Your Substack is so good because each kind of post is like you can read it as its own thing. You can read it as part of the whole. But were you taking notes as you were going through this process? Or was this something you sat down afterwards and thought, let me organize my thoughts?
Both. I've been a journaler my whole life, so I did go back and look at some of my daily journals when I was starting this Substack. But I've been working on what I thought might be a book about my caregiving journey. And I had a close friend who said, hey, maybe to get this out to people sooner, you should do it as a Substack. So that's when I decided that it would really sort of fulfill my mission, so to speak, to push it out sooner and for free on Substack rather than waiting for the process of book proposal and publishing and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Now, Rachael, your experience with caregiving inspired your book, The Millennial Caregiver. Tell us a little more about how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So similarly, the writing process was inspired by my family's experience caring for my dad, who in some ways was a little bit of the opposite of Lauren. He I think was in his late 20s when I was born. I'm the oldest child of three, but he was unfortunately diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's in his late 50s, which is unusual. That's why they call it early onset, because it's younger than 65. So he wasn't in some ways old. He appeared young and physically capable, but his mind was failing him. I was in my late 20s. I was a new mom, so I had a new baby. And I found it particularly challenging to find resources or information that were tailored to me as a younger adult trying to navigate parenthood, career, being a person and losing a parent. And one of the challenges, and particularly with Alzheimer's or neurocognitive diseases, is you kind of lose the person in a really slow manner. You lose who they are, their capabilities, and you still have to kind of cope with each phase of that decline before they eventually, unfortunately, pass away. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to kind of Dr. Google to look for support or try and kind of get a sense of what was to come, I found that there wasn't a lot out there. And there was the resources that were really tailored to an older audience. And that's likely because most caregivers who are in this particular role are a little bit older. But, millennials are a growing generation of caregivers, who are experiencing a decline in their parents, who are used to being able to find out information online, and who are tend to be starting families and pursuing careers or certain career milestones a little bit later than prior generations. So that kind of constellation of factors was the impetus to writing this resource, the Millennial Caregiver, and talking to my peers really about so many of these experiences that I was having, ranging from the legal and the financial to the navigating tough conversations and trying to still work and parent your own children.
Mm-hmm.
And that became kind of different components of this resource. But as Lauren just mentioned, the book writing process can be slow. And so think that the Substack is a great way to get the information out in a really rapid way as well.
I should note too, for people who maybe aren't familiar with what Substack is, it's essentially a blog, right? It's like an online kind of resource where you can post your writing. Viviam, you've been a caregiver, but also a recipient of care. Can you share a little bit about your experience of caregiving?
Sure. I think that from my perspective, culturally speaking, we don't think about it. We don't plan it. It just comes and then you just go.
Mm-hmm.
You do what you need to do. When I was being taken care of, the same thing. I don't think there was any asked or even thought from either one of the relatives that were around, including the grandkids.
Mm-hmm. And just for clarity
mm-hmm.
for our listeners, are you able to just explain briefly like how you came to be needing care?
I have faced cancer twice, and the second time was a little harder, and I had to have more care. And even the grandkids, and I mentioned the grandkids because my oldest is 17 today,
mm-hmm.
the middle one is 12, and the youngest is 6. And this happened almost 3 years ago. And the 3 of them, including the adults, of course, were very caring and very on top of the game. And it's something that automatically happens. In my experience, you obviously need information. You need to follow certain rules and certain prescriptions or indications, but automatically you just do.
Mm-hmm.
Your care, your loved one goes to the bathroom and someone will follow you. It's like you have a shadow, whether it is the 6-year-old, the 17, or the 12, or the adult. As a person that is very independent and very much a caretaker. I'm always, I guess I'm the leader of the pack in my family, so I make
mm-hmm.
the plans. So when I became ill, I had to stop all my plans. I had to stop all my decisions because you lose that power,
mm-hmm.
and you have to give it to other people. So it's really a tough position to be in as well. Yeah.
Now, we've been talking with local caregivers as we've been preparing for this show, and we are going to share some of their stories throughout the hour. Here's Cassie Wood for a start of Tampa. Her husband was diagnosed with brain cancer in 2019.
I was a stay-at-home with our 2-year-old, and I was 9 months pregnant. And my husband was the financial support. So for me, it was, oh crap, how do I do both of these? Like, how am I going to go back to school to get a job that has I was doing hair at the time, so not benefits, good hours. So how the heck am I going to support a family of 3 and take care of everybody? So a lot of it was, I guess, feelings was like shock and just like terrifying.
Okay, so Rachael, what was the moment like when you realized that you were going to be the one responsible for caring for your loved one?
Luckily, I was not alone. I have 2 siblings and my mom is still alive as well. So I think that we all kind of collectively came to this realization. First, when, my dad the small things started to add up. My dad was at a stop stop light when he was driving, and the light turned green and there was no reaction. He started not being able to function at work, and eventually then kind of was limited, left the faucet on for too long, and there was a minor flood in the kitchen. So there were these little signs that kind of indicated to us that he was going to need kind of constant monitoring, kind of similar to that shadow feeling that was just being described. There was always going to need to be somebody with him. We were going to have to be those shadows, unfortunately, in order for him to be safe. And that kind of realization really almost takes your breath away, takes you by surprise. And I think, for better or worse, there's not a lot of time to think clearly when that experience kind of comes, because all you simply have to react. You have to figure out, how are we keeping this person safe and cared for in this moment? And then how are we adapting as kind of new concerns or come up? How do we keep him fed? How do we keep him safe? As I mentioned, how can he bathe and take care of himself? How is he taking his medication? And so all of those little things suddenly become kind of big hurdles to navigate. And I think that what also became really important for us was to try and determine what we safely felt like we could do as at-home caregivers, familial caregivers, and when it would no longer be safe for him to live at home, either because the space wasn't functional. There's only so many modifications you can make to an apartment where there's stairs and, inaccessible bathrooms and whatnot.
Lauren, you write in your Substack about the dividing line between helping and enabling, and how it's sometimes hard to kind of tell where you are. Can you explain a little bit?
Yeah. There's a lot of advice out there that will tell you to encourage your parent or your loved one to move as much as possible, to be as independent as they can be, because, if you don't move it, you lose it. Kind of with muscle, as you get older, you lose the ability to do things for yourself. But on the other hand, you want to help your parent out. You want to make sure that they're in a safe, clean, healthy environment. So for me, what that looked like was, when I would stop by my dad's apartment, I would take out the trash. And then eventually it became, my dad would call me and say, "Hey, you haven't been here in a while. The trash is really piling up." And then it became, I would stop by and there would be trash on the floor because he hadn't even bothered to bag it up. And so there was this decline, and I was always sort of figuring out, like, should I push him? Take the trash out yourself. You're capable of, at least bagging it up and putting it by the door for me. Or should I just, you have to live in a clean house. Is this not a battle I should fight? I think that's something that so many caregivers, navigate, is how do I push them to do as much as they can, but at the same time care for them, make sure they're safe and healthy. Yeah,
and I guess that can be hard when you're close to the problem, right? Because it's somebody you know and you love, and it's hard to sort of have that separation.
Right. You don't want to see them live. I can't go to my dad's apartment and see trash on the ground and just live with it. I need to make sure that he's safe and healthy. And then I think the other question is really interrogating, why is this happening? Is this because you're feeling depressed about how lonely you are and how little you have going on in life? Or is this because you can't physically stand up to bag up the trash? Or is this because, like what Rachael was mentioning, perhaps mentally it's not occurring to you that this is a task you need to complete? And I think as a caregiver, it's your responsibility to figure out exactly why is this happening, instead of feeling mad or resentful, like, I'm so mad that this trash is my responsibility. It's more about, let me be curious about what's actually causing this problem.
All right. So on the issue of responsibility, I want to just play a little more sound here. This is Christina Williams of Largo. Now, her mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2018. Christina was her caregiver until 2023 when she passed away. And she had some interesting kind of thoughts about responsibility.
You take care of your mother. You just deal with it. You have to figure it out, but you don't put your person in a facility. Oftentimes that's to the detriment of the caregiver, as we know. But that's kind of just like, the martyr of caregiving that they felt like is what you do, and especially as the only daughter.
All right. So, Viviam, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that. What about the responsibility of being a caregiver, whether it's because you feel like you're the only one around, or because there are some kind of cultural constraints in place? Just explain a little bit what's going on there.
It's very cultural from my perspective, and it's not a constraint. It's just something that, and it's not like I have to pay back to my loved one. It's part of what a family does. It's just what it is. So when my grandmother became ill, it was not even spoken about. She was hospitalized, and I moved myself to the hospital, and my siblings will actually come and go to relieve me. I was the most, with the agenda, most flexible agenda. So I had that opportunity. When my husband, who I also cared for a little bit, became ill, I was there, of course, 24/7, but then my relatives came to, relieve me so I could have some time for myself and kind of recuperate some energy. Mm-hmm. But culturally, in our case, and I'm obviously Hispanic, but, we don't really think about what are we going to do if our loved one has to be put in an institution. In fact, we don't even talk about it. Now, if the time comes, it's really hard. That's when we struggle. We don't struggle taking care of the person, per se, because it's part of the nature. But when the decision has to be made, I think that's when we have the hardest time, because how are we going to do this? There's a sense of guilt also of not being able to really care for this person until the time is over in this planet. So I think that's where, it strikes us really bad. How are we able to deal with this? And I've known, I work in the cancer world, and a lot of the people I deal with, some of them are caring, even though they're patients, they're caring for their loved ones. Mm-hmm. And they have a hard time realizing that sooner or later they're going to have to get assistance because themselves are really ill.
I want to just play a little more sound here. Now, millennial caregivers, of course, may be going through some profound life changes themselves while they're dealing with the day-to-day challenges of caregiving, things like having children, buying a house, building a career. Here's Cassie Woods again.
I say the same thing about my kids. I'm like, I don't know if I would have gotten through without them, because they were a lot at the time, but they were such a good distraction, because you're like, I can't be sad right now because my kids are dancing around to like Bluey and laughing like naked. You know what I mean? Like just being kids and cute. So my kids bring me a lot of joy, and they make me stay grounded and stay present.
All right. And just for folks who may not be aware, Cassie mentioned Bluey, and if you're not familiar, that's a kids show from Australia, which has kind of taken over the world. It's about an inexhaustible puppy who lives with her mum, dad, and little sister, Bingo. Lauren, we were just chatting before we got on air about what you listen to in the car with your kids when you've got them with you. That can be challenging, right? I mean, because you have demands on your time. So how do you sort of balance out those competing interests?
It was hard, especially in when my dad was quite sick. At one point, he did come home from a facility. He really wanted to be home. And he was back in his apartment, and we arranged all these different caregivers to come by and help him out. But again, it was 2021, so it was a little scary having folks that we didn't know come in the house because of, we weren't sure who was wearing a mask and COVID. And the last thing I wanted to do is for my dad to get sick with COVID on top of everything else. So, but I had a kid at home. My son was born at the end of 2019. So he was just over a year old. My dad's home from a facility, and we realized he can't make it to the bathroom. And so he's got these, adult diapers, but my dad was a big guy. And so I couldn't lift him up to change him. And so my husband would have to drive over to his apartment and get my dad changed with the caregiver while I'm home with our baby, who I'm afraid to bring over because I'm afraid of the COVID risk. And it's just like, we were not far away, 5 minutes, but it was still such a hard thing. Like, okay, we got to go. My dad's calling. He needs you right now. And the baby's in the bathtub. And it's just a lot. And you're being pulled in so many different directions. And as a millennial, you want to be able to do it all and Google your way out of it. But there's no tech solution for that. You got to just power through. And I think being in 2021, it was so stark that we didn't have that village that people need you talk about a village to raise a child, but you really need a village to care for an aging parent too.
So basically, you don't just need one village, you need a couple of villages at your disposal. Well, you're listening to Florida Matters. We're recording this from the doctors Lorraine Rubis and Neil Frankel studio at WSF. We're talking about caregiving and the challenge of caring for your loved one while juggling a career, raising a family, studying, and more. The conversation continues after this. You're listening to WSF Tampa, and this is Florida Matters, recorded at the doctors Lorraine Rubis and Neil Frankel studio at WSF. I'm Matthew Petty. Let's continue our conversation about caregiving as a millennial. You're hearing from Rachael Piltch-Loeb, author of The Millennial Caregiver, Caring for Loved Ones in the Busiest Years of Your Life. With us also Viviam Sifontes, an educator at Moffit Cancer Center, and Lauren Klinger, author of Learn From My Mistakes, Substack. She lives in the Tampa area and cared for her father until his death in 2021. Well, it's clear from our talk that it's overwhelming or can be overwhelming to suddenly take on the role of caregiver. Let's talk a little bit about resources. So, Rachael, you write in your book about how millennials may be more inclined to look online first for resources, and you've mentioned something like Dr. Google, which is a pretty typical response, I think, for somebody looking for any kind of information. But it sounds like there may be some pros and cons. Could you just kind of walk us through what those might be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that is a lot of great content that we have at our fingertips. We're online all the time. We're used to being able to type in a search term and get back what we wanted. But and I think I'll give a just specific example. Let's say looking for resources or facilities where dad or the person you're caring for can kind of go and get some supportive therapy, whether they're in occupational therapy or they kind of maybe it's art or music therapy, right? To kind of try and keep their mind at ease, or maybe it's a psychologist who deals with patients or is used to talking to patients who are kind of coping with end of life issues. There are databases and resources out there. There's aging care networks online. There's and that can all be incredibly helpful. I think where the breakdown is the actual kind of like booking and engagement with those services. So there's still an intensive kind of need to actually connect and vet those people to figure out whether or not they have availability. Mm-hmm. And that goes to figuring out adult daycare centers or memory care facilities. There's a real kind of breakdown in moving beyond kind of like, here's the potential list of things that you may be considering. Another example where I think technology can be extremely helpful is there's the ability to connect with other caregivers online. We don't always have an in-person village of people who really understand kind of the caregiving experience. Let's say you don't have siblings around or you don't have a big family. I think it can be particularly isolating. And so kind of connecting through Facebook or through support groups that are put on by different nonprofits that are run online, that's a real opportunity to kind of find community, which I think can be extremely beneficial. Mm-hmm. I think that there are lots of pros and cons of kind of trying to access things online, but it is kind of valuable to pursue those tools depending on kind of what your needs are. And I would say the last area where the electronic environment can be particularly helpful is actually in supporting your loved one a little bit. If they are capable of still using a device, there are a variety of different kind of games and programs that are helpful and tailored to adults who are potentially in different stages of decline if it's their mental state that's in decline. So it can be a real lifeline to maintain some form of connection. Yeah. But I think all of these have limitations, right? And I think it's critical that we recognize that because as folks have said, it's not going to solve the problem. There's still such a critical component of in-person engagement of speak that is necessary when you're in the caregiving space.
Viviam, how do you go about helping connect caregivers with resources in the work that you do now?
Well, Moffit offers support groups for not just the patients, but also the caregivers. And through Moffit, there are different organizations, like one specifically that I can think of is Luna, which is for the Spanish-speaking population. Mm-hmm. And that particular agency or organization offers services not just for the patient, but also for their relatives and caregivers. And so, but in our case, I think it's a little bit, it goes beyond that. Asking for help or coming to the support groups is not as easy culturally taken. So a lot of times you offer the resources, and I have to echo Rachael because there are resources available. But the barrier comes from the individual that, I can do this because we have that cultural component that it is our job to take care of the loved one. Mm-hmm. And not getting the assistance from some other organization or other person is kind of, no, it's not for me. Right. I can do this.
It's like a culture of self-sufficiency.
Correct, yes. So when the time comes to make that decision of getting the help, you have to break a lot of self-beliefs and principles that you have lived with for your entire life. Mm-hmm. But yes, Moffit has great resources available for the caregivers as well.
Let's hear again from Christina Williams. She shares her frustrations with the healthcare system. Here she describes talking to a neurologist and her mom in 2018.
He was just like, oh, hey, like he's joking with her, talking. I'm like, dude, let's pause on that and let's just do your job first. But he did the little 3 questions, and she was able to answer the 3 questions. Who's the president? What's your name? And something like else. And I'm like, okay, but can we ask that 20 minutes into the visit? Then will she be he just was very cavalier. No, I think you're okay.
All right. So it can be challenging kind of going through some of those healthcare appointments with someone who you're caring for. Lauren, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the challenges that you faced in managing your father's healthcare and also what worked well for you.
Yeah, I did start going to a lot of appointments with my dad, and then he was hospitalized off and on for many years, and I was always there to the best of my ability. And at first, I was sort of there just to tag along, and then I was there as the driver because he stopped driving. And then eventually I realized that, hey, wait, keeping track of everything that goes on in this appointment is actually where I could be useful.
So using your writing skills there.
Yeah, exactly. Journaling is very second nature to me. So I kept track of what medications he was on. And then if anything new got prescribed, I made sure to Google interactions with his other medications. And then if a specialist prescribed a drug, I made sure to tell his primary care doctor, hey, the specialist prescribed this, or the hospital gave him this, or the hospital didn't give him this, which often happens. Medications get dropped when you're in the hospital. And then I realized that keeping track of follow-ups was my job too, making sure, he got referred to a urologist. I need to find one that is in network for his insurance and that he's willing to go to. And then I need to schedule with my job at the time, figuring out, okay, when can I take him to this appointment so that I can be there? And sometimes he got, my dad was fully lucid until his death. So he would be kind of mad at me for taking over sometimes of I can answer these questions, So I had to really balance between what am I going to answer and what am I just going to be quiet and let him answer. And I think allowing your loved one to maintain some agency in those appointments is important, making sure that the doctor addresses them when they ask questions and addresses them when they give the instructions, I think is really important. But you, at the same time as the caregiver, need to be taking notes. And I did like to take notes on paper most of the time so that my dad could see these are the follow-ups that we need to do. And then sometimes I would also duplicate them in a Google Doc so I could have it myself. As a millennial, I want to have it digitally. But I think we need to be cautious, those of us who are super online, that anything we take digital does become more invisible to our loved one if they're not also very online. So you want to take notes in a way that's going to work for you, but you also need to make sure that they are participating in their own care.
Right.
I would say that's my biggest takeaway in terms of attending doctor's appointments is keep track of stuff, but also keep your loved one as involved as they can be.
Right. You got to kind of meet them where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another perspective. This is Cassie Wood again. Now, she prefers to think of herself as a care partner.
we're kind of dealing with it together. It's not just like him making decisions and doing the treatment. Like, I got to go. My kids got to go. We have to figure it out logistically. So I think it's evolved more from very one-sided, although he needs more help, to more like an equal, like, we're in this, we're going to figure this out, but we're both also going to have a life outside of this cancer.
All right. So the idea of a care partner may not always be realistic. Rachel, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that each care team or care partner, care experience is going to kind of look a little bit different. And, in writing the book, and I interviewed lots of different people. And one of the things I tried to do was kind of figure out what was common across different experiences, because we all bring different perspectives to the table. And so and it was evident that different kind of caregiving dynamics really existed depending on the relationship that you have. I think the pre-existing relationship that you have with the person who you're caring for, as well as the existing dynamics that exist with anybody else who's kind of a part of the care team. And the experience and comfortability that you as the caregiver and the patient has with the general medical system. There's a lot of people who, for good reason, have mistrust in our medical system, or who've had bad experiences. Some insurance or healthcare systems have better kind of social worker and care navigators than others. So I think that all these are great strategies, but it's really varied as to folks' experiences and supports and connections when they're caregiving.
Yeah, Viviam, what about that? I mean, what do you suggest when folks are struggling with the system and need a little bit of extra help?
And we see this often at Moffit, a lot of patients will come in with a bunch of members of the family, and everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a saying in the situation, although the final decision is on the patient, of course. For Hispanics or for the majority, or from a cultural perspective, we make those decisions together. And in a world that is different from the cultural itself, we also need to adjust, of course. So I find that in our organization at Moffit, we're very sensitive to those needs. That makes it very easy, or at least easier, for the family and the patient to adjust to whatever is happening and make those decisions together, and yet leave the final thought or saying to the patient as much as possible, because sometimes the patient can't. I remember from my grandmother, the doctor had things to say that we didn't feel good about my grandmother listening to it. So we asked the doctor to give us the information prior to bringing it to my grandmother, because we felt that we had the best communication or ways to communicate to her what was happening. And this is what we did. They were sensitive enough to respect that. They gave us the information, and then we brought it to my grandmother, and she made the final decision. And we respected that. But we felt that was, we did this together. And the hospital was great enough to respect that and, of course, provide all the care needed for my grandmother. So I really motivate and encourage the patients that I deal with to, open to the possibility of accepting the assistance from the resources available, particularly at Moffit. I really do, because it's really, it makes you stronger, and it makes the process, I don't know if it is easier, the word that I would use, but at least it helps them navigate the entire situation a little better.
Yeah. Lauren, I see you nodding there, sort of hearing some of those things about kind of making those decisions collectively, and when to sort of step in, when to bring the patient more involved in the situation and the process.
Yeah, it's hard. You want your loved one to have as much agency in their life as as they can. I mean, think about what you would want. You're hospitalized or you've got a scary diagnosis. You want to be involved in your own care. And there may come a point when you can't be, and you want to make sure that your loved ones know what you would have wanted if you could have spoken for yourself. And I think I love the idea of a care team or a care partner, because to think of yourself as the only one responsible is really scary. It's a lot on you, trust me. There are a lot of things you can put in place, a lot of questions you can ask your loved one ahead of time that in a not scary way. It doesn't have to be this thing where you're like, well, you're going to die soon. Let's talk about it. And, you can have this conversation of, oh, I saw this person down the street. They moved to assisted living. What do you think about that? Or, your stairs are really steep. What's going to happen one day if you can't walk up them? Or, Aunt Linda isn't hearing as well as she used to. I wish she would get a hearing aid. If you ever get to a point where I notice you can't hear as well, what do you want to do? So you're sort of having these conversations in advance that don't seem scary. I think that can create this situation where you are able to treat your loved one as a partner in their care down the line, even when they can't speak for themselves as well.
Yeah. Here's another insight. This again is Christina. This is about getting your affairs in order.
It would behoove you, and the best gift you can give is to have your affairs in order, because we all are going to leave here at some point. That has been my most frustration with extended family, is trying to talk to them and handle your affairs. Get these 3 to 4 documents in order, and it will be the best gift you can give.
Rachael, what about that? What are some documents a caregiver might need?
Yeah, I totally echo the sentiment. Those documents can be super taxing, and they include things like a will. What are your plans, or what do you want to have happen with your affairs after you die? While you're alive, it can include things like a healthcare proxy. So who have you designated that can legally make decisions for you in the event that you're not able to make decisions for yourself? It can include a power of attorney. So who can sign documents for you if you're alive but incapacitated? These things are not trivial, because you will find that it is. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, sometimes in a good way and sometimes in a challenging way when somebody is not well and they have not made their wishes clear in writing. And even if maybe the wishes are clear and everyone's on the same page, if somebody hasn't been designated to legally make choices for somebody who is alive, it can be a real fight with courts or a healthcare system to be able to ultimately make a choice for that person. I know that, we, and when making these plans, it can be helpful to have some redundancy too. So who, designating more than one family member or part of the caregiving team who is able to make a healthcare choice in the event that somebody is not available. I know that we had me and my mom who were able to do that, for example. Similarly with power of attorney, if spouses have designated each other, for example, to be able to make decisions, but both spouses are in a similar position or maybe ailing, it's critical to try and identify who else may be able to do that. So these documents are critical, and they can be really challenging to talk about because, as we were just kind of alluding to, they involve having to discuss the potential for death and the inevitability that that's going to happen. And not everybody is able to navigate that so easily.
Yeah. Just in the last 30 seconds or so before we go to break, Lauren, what's a good way to start on some of these tricky conversations? You kind of mentioned a little bit before.
Yeah, I think you can start with what if conversations. This isn't happening right now, but what if this were to happen in the future? Or you can talk about a friend who's going through something similar. I learned about my friend Kristen. Her parents are getting rid of all their stuff and they're moving out. So what do you want to do at that point? What should we do with your stuff? Have you thought about it? Or you can talk to your parents about, or your loved one about caregiving experiences they might have had. When your parent was aging, did you have to deal with X, Y, and Z? And sort of plant those seeds of the conversation early so that when it comes time, you're ready.
Yeah. And it's not just a sort of a one-off thing. I think that comes across in your writing too, Lauren. It's a process, but you've got to start it at some point. You are listening to Florida Matters. We're recording this at the doctors Lorraine Rubis and Neil Frankel studio at WSF. We're talking about caregiving, and coming up in a moment, we'll talk about self-care for caregivers. You're listening to Florida Matters, and we're recording this in the doctors Lorraine Rubis and Neil Frankel studio at WSF. I'm Matthew Petty. You're hearing from three people very familiar with caregiving. We're talking with author Rachael Piltch-Loeb, Viviam Sifontes, research educator at the Moffit Cancer Center in Tampa, and Wesley Chapel resident Klinger, author of Learn From My Mistakes. It's a substack about caregiving. Well, self-care is important for caregivers. Let's hear from Cassie Wood's perspective on it.
It's that cliche. It's like, if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of others. But like, I think caregivers ignore that. And we have to remind ourselves that like, it's okay if I take a day off and go get a spa treatment. Like, I'm not selfish because my husband's sitting at home and I'm allowed to talk about my feelings and, have feelings. So I think that's a big misconception about caregivers, that we also continue that misconception ourselves. Like, we fit into it too.
All right. So, Rachael, what about the caregivers support network as part of that, giving the caregiver what they need and maybe allowing them to have that self-care and do the best work they can as a caregiver?
Yeah, support is so critical. And I think folks find it in different ways. So, electronically, we can connect with different support groups, kind of share with some anonymity, things that maybe feel less comfortable to talk with people about. I think one of the things that's challenging sometimes when you're a caregiver is not oversharing and feeling like you're kind of violating the autonomy of the person you're caring for. Like, let's say my dad committed some form of faux pas or was really frustrating. I didn't want to be perceived as kind of talking negatively about him. I mean, the guy wasn't in control of his mental state. That being said, it doesn't mean like there weren't days or times that were kind of like kooky and frustrating. And so like, how do you balance those conversations without feeling like you're kind of criticizing the person you're caring for? And that can be complicated. And so other people who are in caregiving kind of positions can be relatively understanding because they get it. There's just some camaraderie in that. Mm-hmm. But I think beyond that kind of form of expression and which can for some be a form of self-care, it's critical to figure out what you like to do and to not kind of lose that in the doldrums of caregiving. So for me, it was, spending some time with my kids and giving them undivided attention or having a monthly dinner with girlfriends where I didn't talk about kind of what was going on with my dad and, still finding kind of windows of time to spend just me and my husband. So I think it really just depends on what's important to you. Some people it's exercise or walking outside, but trying to maintain some time in your schedule that can be for yourself is critical because you will continue to be a person even when the caregiving experience comes to an end.
Lauren, something Rachael said just now made me think of one of the things you're writing about, which is, I think it's called most generous interpretation, right? You're trying to kind of reframe the way you think about things, and that can help you deal with some of the frustration that comes along with caregiving.
Yeah, I stole this idea from a parenting book. Millennials will know the parenting whisperer, Dr. Becky. So in her book, she talks about interpreting your kids' actions in the most generous way. And I apply this concept to caregiving too. So my dad, for example, was very abrupt with me sometimes. So thinking about, okay, why was that? Okay, most generous interpretation. He's overly tired. He's got all these medications that he's taking that are making him feel drowsy during the day, but keep him awake at night. So he's not getting the restorative sleep that he would normally get that would make him more affable. He's perhaps not socializing as much. So he's sort of out of practice with socializing, or he's had all these uncomfortable sensations. He's got some pain happening. So staying curious about what's going on with your loved one, why they're exhibiting certain symptoms, I think is really important. But also choosing to interpret their actions generously, I think will really help you as a caregiver not build up these resentments of they must be acting this way because they don't care that I have a private life. They obviously don't care that I have kids at home. I have a job. I have all these other responsibilities. They are taking advantage of me. These mindsets are easy to fall into, but it's imperative to set up these systems for yourself so that you're interpreting their actions generously. And that doesn't mean relaxing all your boundaries and letting someone walk all over you. It just means choosing to interpret things generously as a way to maintain your vision of a person, your idea of who a person is at their core, rather than letting these annoyances or day-to-day things or symptoms overwhelm your experience.
Viviam, what about that idea of boundaries? Because that can be hard to maintain at the best of times, right?
Yeah, I have to echo Lauren because building resentment is very easy if you do not use your empathy skills. You have to place yourself in their shoes and protect yourself from taking that personally. I think that taking care of yourself is, I usually tell people, if you fly, the flight attendant will tell you. If the oxygen mask comes down, you have to put it on yourself first, even if you have your child next to you. You have to be well in order to take care of your child or anybody else. So somehow you have to find a way of taking care of yourself in order to continue the duty that you feel you have, in your hands. Whether it is going out with friends, whether it is going to yoga class, whether it is to taking a long bath, whatever it is that will give you some time of sanity for yourself to enjoy yourself has to be part of that routine that you build with your loved one. Because once you become resentful or become ill, then what's going to happen?
There's a component of this too, and just kind of this notion of it taking a village and a team of people to really be effective. And we've heard that asking for help can be tricky, though, for caregivers. Let's listen again. Here's Cassie Wood.
You just got to be okay with people saying no to you, because they will. And that's not because they don't love you, because, there's things going on. But also be very specific. Like they'll be able to let me know, what I can do. And I'd be like, okay, sure. Never answer them. I had to learn to be very specific. Like, I need a break. Can you take my kids today? And most of the time people say yes and they'll help. So you just need to be very, very specific, because people don't know, like, you're dealing with what you need help with unless they're like living with you.
All right. So asking for help is critical, with sort of knowing who can give you help and what sort of help they can provide. Rachael, what about that? What's been your experience of how to ask for help as a caregiver?
Yeah, I echo the sentiment that it can be challenging to ask for help, but you need to be a little bit shameless about it. Nobody knows what you're kind of experiencing if you don't tell them. And I think that it can be critical to be as direct as possible. I need help with X. Can you do it, or can you point me to somebody who can? So depending on what kind of the needs are, I think if you have extended family or friends who are local and you can make some semblance of a schedule. So every Wednesday, one of my uncles would come and take my dad to the movies, for example. My dad kind of lost his ability to use language, but he could still seemingly get some entertainment from watching something on TV. And that then provided, a 2 to 4 hour window, depending on length of the movie, where he was occupied. And that meant that something else could be accomplished kind of during that time. So being as kind of direct as possible to maintain some form of schedule can be helpful both for you and for the person that you're caring for. It kind of establishes some form of expectations for everybody. And if you have those people in your life who you can rely on, it's kind of critical to tap them. And I think that the other thing I would add is, it's critical to ask for help, and it's critical to simplify for yourself as much as possible and recognize that you need to give yourself some grace. So if you are focusing on the person you're caring for and you're not able to get, a warm meal on the table for your kids that night, it's okay. And so I think recognizing it's important to ask for help and it's important to give yourself kind of some grace in the situation is also really important.
There was something else you mentioned before to Rachel that resonated about that you are still going to be there, once your caregiving role has come to an end. And here's an insight again from Christina Williams. Let's just take a listen.
I didn't live with my mom, so there was a part of me that I emphatically was like, I have to keep my own identity. Because prior to that, my mom and I, we've had so many convergence of, well, where does June end and Christina start? And even when people see me, because I'm from, like everybody knows me, I look like my mom. Oh, you're June's daughter. And I'm like, no, I'm Christina.
Rachel, what about that idea of keeping something of yourself in reserve if you're a caregiver, and how do you make sure that you can do that?
It's critical. For caregivers who also work full time, I've talked to many people some who did leave the workforce, some who maintained but scaled back, and some who didn't make a change at all because they couldn't for various reasons. But whether it's work or passion projects or your home life, it's critical to recognize that those components of your identity are hopefully still going to be there. They may change, your priorities may shift as a result of caregiving, but you hopefully have a life ahead of you. And so figuring out how to focus in on what your priorities are in terms of how you want to spend your time, kind of financially sustain your needs and those of your family, and move forward is a critical kind of part of being a caregiver. I've talked to many, especially kind of younger female caregivers who considered, leaving the workforce and then sort of said, but what was I going to do when I was in my late 30s and I had kind of taken myself out of what I thought I wanted my career to be? And I was going to miss that, or in some cases they did miss that. So figuring out how to kind of maintain components of who you are that are important to you is critical, and frankly are likely things that your loved one has helped support you to be if you're caring for a parent. And so, it's important to not lose that, though the balance of how much you're able to put into other forms of your identity may shift as part of the caregiving experience.
Mm-hmm. Vivian, what do you think about that idea of kind of shifting those balances and kind of making sure that your priorities are where you want them to be?
It's very difficult to maintain or to keep balance, particularly when you know your caregiver needs you, but you also need to take care of yourself. And it's critical and fundamental to keep those totally clear. Fortunately, a lot of times it doesn't happen because obviously the emotional connection involved in this situation takes over.
Mm-hmm. Lauren, you write about the importance of preparing to help your parents so you can enjoy spending that time with them. Is there something a little bit kind of counterintuitive about enjoying caregiving?
Yeah. I mean, adults are living longer and longer, and a lot of older adults are living with chronic disease or they need caregiving later in their life. And it's going to sound weird to say, but it's such a gift to get to know your parents at this stage of their life, or to know your grandparents at this stage of their life. And there were lots of times where my dad and I had little jokes about, we would make fun, not in front of her, but we would make fun of the receptionist at the doctor's office, or we would have little inside jokes, or we enjoyed watching football together. And yeah, I didn't get to go to as many Rays games with him in those last couple of years, but there's still joy to be found unless you're mired in the day-to-day of caregiving or in the pursuit of, more information, more knowledge. All of a sudden you're having to Google what's a DNR form, or how do I get power of attorney, or you're looking at online reviews of nursing homes, or you're trying to bulk order diapers. These things all pull away from the time that you could be spending with your loved one. And I think we're not conditioned to see this as a joyful time. And it's hard. It's not to say it's not hard, but you have to find joy in knowing your loved one as they are ending their life, as their life is ending, because that otherwise you're just going to be miserable. And you don't need to be. If you prepare for it appropriately and you have these important big conversations and you do the research and you read the books, maybe some of these logistics can become easier so that you're able to spend time watching football and doing a puzzle. And like Rachael was saying, go to the movies. Like, there are going to be some things your loved one can enjoy no matter what their state is. So if you can get rid of some of these hurdles or get past some of these hurdles, then you can find joy in that time.
Well, I want to thank all our panelists. We've been speaking with Lauren Klinger, a Tampa Bay area caregiver and author of Learn From My Mistakes substack. Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Also with us this hour, Viviam Sifontes, a research educator at Moffit Cancer Center. Viviam, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And Rachael Piltch-Loeb, author of The Millennial Caregiver, Caring for Loved Ones in the Busiest Years of Your Life. Rachael, thank you so much as well.
Thank you so much.
And we want to thank our partners in developing this show, Moffit Cancer Center in Tampa and the Alzheimer's Association Florida region. This caregiving project was funded with a grant from WETA and Viewhouse. It's part of a news documentary and national engagement campaign on the state and stakes of providing care in America. A feature-length documentary and accompanying short films are available on pbs.org and at wellbeings.org. That's our show for this week. Grayson Doctor is our executive producer. Our producer is Amelie Horace, engineering support from Blake Bass. Scott Wachtel mixed and produced this episode. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on WSF's YouTube channel. I'm Matthew Petty. Thank you so much for listening.